Good morning, friends, and let me be one of the first people today to wish you happy 4th of July and happy 250th birthday to the United States. There is a beauty to being an American. We are the longest running country with a single government under a constitution, and there is a blessing and an honor in knowing that we have some unique and distinct freedoms and that we helped set an example for countries in the future. But what I want to look at today that makes America distinct, and what we're going to focus on just for a few minutes this morning, is I want you to see how grief played a role in major leaders in American history. We could look at a plethora of different Americans. We could look at one of our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin was part of our first Continental Congress. He was instrumental in the creation of our country. We could look at the loss of his wife, Deborah Franklin, who passed away 2 years before the country was formed, and how he had mourned her. Tragically, he was in England at that point in time fighting for our country's independence, and his wife passed away, and he wasn't able to be there for her suffering or even her funeral. And writing later on would talk about how he regretted not being there. Or we could look at other founding fathers, a man that was at our Continental Congress, a man named Roger Sherman, whose first wife passed away. Her name was Elizabeth. She died in 1760. He later got remarried, but he carried that grief with him the rest of his life. Or you could look at an instrumental American that we're all familiar with, George Washington, who while himself was not a widower, he did marry Martha Washington, who was a widow, so he understood bearing the weight of that relationship. Or we could look at other Americans, a man like Abraham Lincoln, who once again, while not a widower, in 1862, while he was in office, lost his son, Willie. He died while he was in office, while being president, while going through the Civil War, and having to bear grief at the same time. Or you could look at other men like Thomas Jefferson, one of our first presidents, who his wife passed away, Martha, before he came into being the president. And he carried that weight with him. He was a widower the rest of his days. He was a widower at the age of 33, and he struggled with that back and forth. Or you could look at another American. You could look at President Andrew Jackson, whose wife died shortly before his election, before he took office in 1828. Or you could look at Chester Arthur, who, whenever he became president, his wife died, and he kept fresh flowers almost on a daily basis underneath her picture in the White House. So you could look at all these examples of how grieving people have been a part of our instrumental formation of our country. And I think about how hard it would be just to bear the weight of leading a country, forming it in the Continental Congress, while bearing the weight of grief. But the guy I want to focus on today, in a unique way, is one of our presidents. His name was Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt he was one of the Rough Riders. He was one of the great American outdoorsmen, a wonderful president. He's one of my favorite presidents. He's this tough outdoor individualist, and was really important for a lot of our formation of our country that we have today. But he was also a man that was known to be a hopeless romantic, and he loved his first wife, Alice. Alice was her name. They had a deeply happy marriage, a deeply happy relationship. He met her whenever he was a young student at Harvard, and he was absolutely captivated with her. She was the apple of his eye. Later on, we could look at writings by his friends and family, and they would write about how amazed they were by how their relationship was, like how much they loved each other, how much they cared for each other. And if you were to read Alice's and Theodore Roosevelt's love letters back and forth to one another, it shows this absolute adoration and affection and flirtation back and forth with one another, and how he tenderly loved her. They were married in 1880 and welcomed their first child in February of 1884. And everything looked really great. But if you have lost somebody, you know that there's like really great days, and then there is the day, a moment where things shift, where dark days then come into your life. And for him, the dark day began on February 14th, 1884, 4 years after they were married, Valentine's Day. Early in that day, Theodore's mother, a woman named Martha, she died of typhoid fever. And in that same house, only hours later, his wife Alice would die from kidney failure due to an undiagnosed illness that she had just 2 days after their daughter was born. So what do you think about this? I mean, Theodore Roosevelt, love of his life. He marries her 4 years later on Valentine's Day, 2 days after his little girl is born. He wakes up and his mother passes away. And then just a few hours later, his wife passes away. I want you to fathom the scene in that home for what we consider to be a tough, rugged American, a man that would later become president. His whole life flashed before him, like it seemed to evaporate. You know, within 48 hours, this is what happened. He became a father, and then the woman who gave him life, his mother, passed away, and then the woman who he planned to spend his whole life with, and just gave birth to his child, passed away. Roosevelt wrote in his diary, "The light has gone out of my life," and beneath those words, he drew a very large, dark, bold, black X across the page. What Roosevelt did next was unique. He did not pretend that he was fine. He did not try to run away from his grief. Instead, he stepped away from public life, which had to be difficult for him, because if you know Teddy Roosevelt was a man that loved being in the public light. He loved being able to talk, and he went out to the Dakota territories, and he immersed himself in ranching and the outdoors and physical work, and he used that period of time to heal and to begin the process of moving forward, pressing forward with his grief. It didn't erase his grief. He would talk about that later on. But it gave him room to survive. And for years later, Roosevelt very rarely, if ever, talked about Alice because of how heavy the grief was. He talked about how the pain remained so deep that he found it difficult to discuss her. And yet he continued raising his daughter and building a life while being in the public spotlight. And then 2 years later, he married, in 1886, a woman named Edith. She was a childhood friend of his. By all accounts, they had a happy and strong marriage also. And Edith would become his partner through his rise into politics to become the president. And together they would raise a great family together. I mention all this to you today because a lot of people, whenever they lose their spouse, automatically think, you know what, life is over. They think, you know, I got nothing in front of me. The light of my life is gone. There's going to be no joy. There's going to be no purpose. There's going to be no goals. There's nothing for me in the future. We automatically believe that everything good is canceled out of our life and that the sun will never shine. But then as God offers healing to our life, the deep fog that we're in becomes a lighter fog, and the light begins to shine through it. And as we walk with him, we find that the sun begins to shine. And that doesn't mean there's going to be perfectly sunny days every day. There are days that are still cloudy and that are difficult. And Roosevelt, even decades after his first wife passed away, would openly acknowledge that there were still heavy, difficult days. A lot of widowers wrestle with the fear of moving forward because they think it means moving on. But Roosevelt's life suggests otherwise. Instead, he carried the memory of Alice with him the rest of his life, while allowing other people to be loved by him and for him to love again, building again, and experiencing joy again. And I think that's the beautiful lesson that Roosevelt teaches us is the goal after losing somebody is not to erase that chapter that came before it. You embrace it. It's written in permanent ink. The journey that Tiffany and I had, 14 years of marriage together, that's permanently written into my life. It changed me. It's the man that I am today is because we loved each other and we walked with each other. And nothing can ever replace that. Nothing can ever erase the life that I had built with her. Roosevelt didn't. Healthy relationships after loss don't rely on forgetting and moving on. We press forward, but we don't move on. But what we do is we lean into God and say, okay, God, you wrote a really beautiful few chapters that you've given us. God, can you give us another chapter? And he's not going to tear out the previous pages. He's not going to take the black permanent marker and X out what was there. So Roosevelt's life reminds us that grief can change the story. It does. Like whenever you lose somebody, the story of your life is permanently changed. God already knew those things. He has foreknowledge, but the life that you had planned, the life that you envisioned, the ministry that you had, where you were going to live, where you were going to retire, the job that you would have, how you'd raise children, all those things go upside down. But it doesn't have to end on just the note of grief. Grief goes on with you, but it doesn't have to be the end note. It doesn't have to be the period. It doesn't have to be the sole thing that defines you. Because for Teddy Roosevelt, the light that went out on February 14th, 1884 was never forgotten. Yet, light appeared again. Not to replace the first light, but to help him keep moving forward. And I just want to encourage the men and women that have been following me, that have lost somebody near to them, is your loss that you have from a person that you love deeply. And that loss is a loss you carry with you. You carry with you for decades. If I live to be 100 years old and almost 60 years from now, I'm going to carry a love that I had for Tiffany. Nothing's going to take that away. Nothing will ever be able to replace that. It is indelibly written in my life. It will not go away. But at the same time, God picked up the pen again and said, let me continue to write. He continued to write by giving me somebody new to be married to expand my family. And he gave me an opportunity to do a ministry that would have a deep meaning for other people that have walked through that same valley of the shadow of death for loss and spousal loss. And I am eternally grateful that I have that opportunity to be able to do that. I want to let widows and widowers know, anybody grieving any loss that you have, is grief is a burden that you will bear the rest of your days. I'm not going to sit here and try to make that an impossible reality that you can make one day, oh, you're over grief and it's done, and the sun will shine every day brightly and you'll forget about that person. I can't do that. I would not lie to you about that. But what I can tell you is that we have a God of hope. And that God of hope can provide to you new days and provide to you a blessing to know that even though you're bearing the weight of grief, you could still bear the joy that comes through knowing him and walking with him. So the lesson from Roosevelt today is you continue to bear grief while pressing forward, not moving on, pressing forward and building a life that God has for you today. So I just want to wish you guys a happy 4th of July, happy 250th birthday to America. Enjoy the food out there, enjoy some fireworks, get some time out today with your family, and celebrate your country. I'm grateful to be an American, and thankful we have to celebrate my country today, and thankful to celebrate a God who continues to write our story. God bless you guys. Hope you have a great rest of the day. Bye now.